Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to tonight's Oversight Committee meeting, and Happy New Year to everyone. It is 2018, and this is the gathering of the North-Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategies Oversight Committee. I'm Dr. Stephen Holt, and I have the privilege of chairing this committee. I think I should begin with an apology for anyone who got 30, 40, 50, 70 email from my email address. It was not I. I believe something has happened, and obviously something has happened. I don't know what it is. We'll figure it out. So if you got multiple emails from me about tonight's meeting, I do apologize, but I'm glad you're here. I trust you signed in and got the agenda for the evening. If you will look at the agenda, you can see it's rather full. We will follow the agenda. This is a meeting that's open to the public. However, it is not a public meeting. And what is meant by that is that what we focus on are the items on the agenda, and we will go correspondingly or accordingly to what's on the agenda. And then there is a moment at the end of the meeting where there's an opportunity for public testimony, where individuals can come and will have an allotted amount of time to respond to items that are on the agenda. And I will have some closing comments about that a little later. So in light of that, thanks again for being here, and we have the privilege of starting with our mayor.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it, and thank you all for inviting me. I see that your agenda is very full, and you gave me the entire first half hour, and I hope I don't actually take that entire first half hour, but maybe there'll be some opportunity for questions and answers. And for those in the public here, since I will not be here by the time public testimony starts, I just want people to know I always take public testimony at mayorwheeler@portlandoregon.gov. If you send me an email, I promise you I will read it. I don't have the chance to respond to everybody's emails because I get literally hundreds of them, but I spend a lot of time going through them, and I really appreciate thoughtful input and insights on anything. So first of all, colleagues around this table, I know many of you, I have just met some of you, but I know all of you have lengthy resumes, not only working in the housing sector, but other social justice issues as well. And personally, I feel very excited as a resident of this community to have people who are willing to take time of the caliber of the people that we have around this table to help us go through the issues of housing in North and Northeast Portland. It comes as no surprise to anybody around this table that Portland has a very mixed history when it comes to race, and I have taken many opportunities over my tenure to speak very openly and honestly about our racial history, and there have been many policies that the city of Portland has pursued and development strategies that were pursued by the city of Portland that were intentional in their efforts, I believe, to hurt communities of color. And in particular, I would argue the African American community in North and Northeast Portland has been particularly hard hit. There have been two consequences. The first is the undercutting of institutions in the community and opportunities for people to get together and share and build that sense of community. But even more damaging from my perspective, and maybe this is just sort of my narrow perspective as somebody with an economics background, is that it undercut the community's opportunity to generate intergenerational wealth. And so as we think about our housing strategies in North and Northeast Portland, I think we have to appreciate and refer to that history and use it to help guide our decisions around policy making and also to inform the decisions we make. I know this is a data-driven table. I want to be very clear about that. We are pursuing data-driven strategies around housing, but I think the conversations, the dialogue, and those strategies have to be informed by the reality of our history. Why do I say that? I say that because there are very few neighborhoods in the city of Portland that people of color, the median family of color, can actually afford to live in. from a renter's perspective. And it is also true factually that there are no neighborhoods in the city of Portland that the median household income African American family can afford to live in. And so that's today. This is not ancient history, that's today, 2018. That is the baseline from which we are building, and it is a rather inglorious baseline. So we're hearing a great deal in this nation about the challenges that we're facing as a nation. I think cities, and I'm speaking a little more broadly than just my vision for housing, I think cities that will thrive in the years ahead, 20, 25, 50 years from now, are those cities that are going to be able to leverage inclusiveness and diversity and find ways at the local level to actually reverse the trends we're seeing around income inequality. And the issue of housing gets to that issue of income inequality. And remember, the baseline from which we are starting. So I'm here tonight really to offer one message, and that is that I support the work that you are doing here in the Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy Oversight Committee. I support your work. I support the recommendations that you will come up with that will be implemented by the Portland Housing Bureau, and I am currently the commissioner of the Portland Housing Bureau. We are going to look for more ways to fund our investments, and we already have a pretty good portfolio. We've got obviously the recently passed housing bond, that's $256-ish million. We have the construction excise tax. We obviously have tax increment financing in the urban renewal areas, and I will continue to support those efforts. I will also continue to support the preference policy. I'm very proud of the work that this group has done to address in a concrete manner a very complex issue. And you've done so in a way that I think it will never redress or make up for the inequities and the injustices of the past. But I think it is one of those policies that is informed by the past, and I just think out of a sense of plain fairness, that those who are the most impacted by policies and urban renewal decisions should be at the front of the line when it comes to figuring out how do we think about the future in this community. So I have lots of visions for housing. I would, people say, well, what's your vision for housing? My vision for housing is very inclusive. Obviously we need more production of units, we need more in the pipeline, but we also need to preserve the housing that we have now. And given the amount of displacement that we're seeing throughout the community, and certainly in North and Northeast Portland, but really all throughout our broader community, housing preservation has to be seen as just as important. Home ownership opportunities need to continue to be an important part of the discussion. I continue to be very interested in tenant protections and renters' rights. That is something that has been of great importance to me, and continuing to work with you to have a reflection of what the community wants and expects from local government continues to be a priority for me as well. I don't think I need to go too far as to say that there's a lack of trust towards city government here in the city of Portland. And I know people say, well, that's true everywhere. Nobody trusts the institution of government. And to that I say, I don't care. I really don't care what people think about city government in Cincinnati. I care about what they think here. And I care about our own history and our own needs and our own challenges and our own capacity to leverage our strengths here in terms of what we can accomplish. And I see your role here as being critically important in that. So I think I'll stop there because I probably could go on longer, but I shouldn't. So Dr. Holt, I'll leave it to your discretion as to whether that's all you want from me or whether you'd like me to answer some questions or what your preference is.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And again, we're glad you're here. What I want to do is give opportunity for our Oversight Committee members to engage with you, Mr. Mayor. So I will defer to the members of the Oversight Committee? And if there are no, I've got several. So thoughts, comments, questions, here's your opportunity to interact.
Sorry, do I have to do that? I'm always, you always have the opportunity to reach out to me individually too, if you prefer that.
Thanks, and I'm glad that you were able to make it to our meeting. We've been working very hard in this project to have this kind of public transparency, and I think it's important for you to be here as the mayor with us tonight, and perhaps on other occasions too. It would be great. This work is deeply important, and this geography here that we're sitting in, that's bounded by this urban renewal area, is deeply important historically, and it is not complete when we talk about African American experiences, life, and community in the city of Portland. So the comment that I want to make is that while I think this work is of course very crucial, it's why I put my time into it, there are other sites of opportunity of development and redevelopment that are either live right now or will be in the coming years that are equally important in terms of providing for affordable housing, but also for very significant economic opportunities for African American families here to be able to build and grow and thrive. And they are sites of deep historical importance to this community. And I speak primarily of the plan for the Broadway corridor, that both the post office site on the west side of the river, the Rose Quarter site, and over to the Lloyd District are all sites of displacement of African Americans. That the first Black folks who lived here lived by the train station. The next major community having been destroyed to build Memorial Coliseum and to expand the Rose Quarter. It's not just this part of Northeast Portland, but in fact is a broader geography, and that the same kind of racial justice lens and the same kind of attention toward historical repair needs to be paid in those projects, and particularly where there's economic opportunities, not just for affordable housing, what our purview is here, but for a broader set of economic opportunities. But even further than that, I think it's critical that we talk seriously about places that African Americans live now. That everyone is not going to move back to Northeast Portland. And there are many Black folks who live now in neighborhoods where the equity conversation is not yet including their experience. They are some of the most deeply affected by displacement in our city, and the sort of dislocation and root shock that happens, and are often, frankly, overlooked in some of the processes and conversations that are happening in East Portland, for example, and deep Southeast Portland. And so I would just ask that we also ensure that we are taking very seriously the long tail of impacts and repercussions that this community has, regardless of where people are living right now.
May I respond to that?
Absolutely.
Briefly? Dr. Bates, you're exactly right. And there are many opportunities. The Rose Quarter to me is a particularly interesting opportunity, both for the historical reasons as well as the level of energy that the community is currently investing in the future development of that site. And it's something the city has been talking about for a long, long time, but with some of the transportation and infrastructure related investments that are being made now, the reality is that site will be developed, I think, sooner rather than later. And I don't think I'm breaking any news when I say that the school district, Portland Public Schools, that owns a large chunk of that site, they're very interested in alternative strategies in terms of location. So all of a sudden, all of these pieces are coming together. But there will be no development of the Rose Quarter anytime during my tenure, or any planning for the development of the Rose Quarter that does not reflect both the history of that site and the opportunity going forward to ensure that those who are impacted by that development have opportunities to gain economically from it. And it's not just housing, of course. It's procurement, it's contracting, it's the work that's done. As you know, in developments, lots of money gets made, particularly in this day and age. No surprise, development is very lucrative. I want to make sure that communities that have historically been left out of those opportunities have opportunities to participate. And I'm already really gratified by the caliber and the number of people who are circling around the table with me right now to talk about potential visions for that site. Same is true, obviously, with the Broadway corridor. You're right to mention the Lloyd District. People tend to forget about the Lloyd District, but the reality is there's a lot of development that has not yet happened in the Lloyd District that will happen. I would also include, although it may not be quite as germane from an historical perspective, OMSI is sitting on a very large land trust, and while they will have control over their own development, I know they're interested in doing things that are reflective of the needs of the broader community. And of course, the South Waterfront still provides a lot of runway in terms of development at the Zidell site and some of the undeveloped sites farther to the south in the south of the Zidell site, north of John's Landing. So your point is well taken. And that's not just going to be the Housing Bureau. Prosper Portland needs to fulfill the vision and the mission that they have publicly stated.
Can you say something about the post office?
So the post office site is early in. The post office agreement with the city of Portland, as I understand it, precludes any actual negotiations with any developers. I believe by the end of this year, there will actually be a request for proposals, or at least a request for qualifications, looking for master plan development strategies. There will be tons of community input on the development of that site, because it will be, bar none, the single largest development we've ever undertaken as a city. It is really the last best opportunity to build a neighborhood from scratch in the central city. So there will not be anything that happens quickly or without solid planning. There has to be a strategy that is laid out very thoughtfully. I don't intend to do a knee-jerk development just because we can and because the market will bear it. I really want us to think about the details, think about the planning process, how we get from concept, what is the need of, what does the community want, what's the best and highest use, how do we reflect the goals of the community, and then lay out a thoughtful process.
I think my concern about that and the distinction of what I'm hearing is it is gratifying and wonderful to hear your vision about the Rose Quarter. The post office site is a live development. I mean, that's happening in a much quicker time frame, and so I'm really hoping to hear from you an articulation of a recognition that that is also a historical site of African American presence in the city that should be acknowledged, but also that regardless of the depth or numbers of people of a history of Black presence in a site, that when you have the quote last best opportunity to build a neighborhood from scratch, that if that does not specifically address the kind of disparities that you outlined for African Americans through its economic opportunities, through its opportunities for housing downtown, et cetera, that project would not really be a success. And that is concretely in conversation right now, not just in the visioning stage.
Yes, your point is extremely well taken, and I agree with it. And in all phases of that development, and frankly, any large-scale future development in this city cannot escape the historical precedent that you've referenced. And similarly, I think you're going to see, I'll give you a slightly different, it's not necessarily germane specifically to the Broadway corridor project, but I was surprised by the reaction to my call on the proposed Southwest corridor development strategies. You know, TriMet wants to build a rail line down the Southwest corridor. And I put down a marker. I said, if we do this as a region, we are not going to pursue a strategy that merely leads to displacement of lower income households that are currently along that right of way. We are going to be planful in terms of implementing an affordable housing and anti-displacement strategy. And it didn't go over very well, was my recollection. I think the first thing people said, well, you're asking us to do something illegal. Then other people said it wouldn't work with the bonding strategy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm here to, I guess, both admire, reflect on, and agree with your clear sense of intentionality about development and expressing clearly the values and the goals that have to be up front. And so I take your admonition not as a challenge, but as an agreement that that is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the Oversight Committee that wants to ask? Oh, okay.
I just wanted to ask, we know given the new tax reform that was adopted, we know that that's going to have negative impact on funding for the development of affordable housing. Has there been an assessment of how the city of Portland is going to be impacted by that? And then what's the plan for being able to sustain what we're doing and to keep moving forward, given that there'll be a shortage?
So I know that the chief financial officer for the city has prepared documents showing what the shortfall to the city of Portland would be. I have not seen the revised version based on the revised bill that was supported by Congress. I recall that the first bill had about $12 million in potential impact, but not all of that went through. And there were some funding options that I'm particularly happy were actually restored at the last minute, including the tax credits associated with mortgages. I thought that was very important. The municipal bond credits were restored, which is really important for any infrastructure developments that we want to make. I could ask for a more thoughtful analysis and get it to Stephen to get out to the committee. Rather than me just thumbnailing it, I'd rather get you a good analysis.
Mayor, I know at one point you made a presentation before a group, and I had a chance to talk with you, and we talked about the idea of enlightened public-private partnership. And one of the things that I think this committee is able to do is to help support that kind of a concept when reviewing the things that we have coming from the community and options that they present as ways that we can address not only the bringing back of folk from who were here, or or changing the legacy of their children to be able to come back into the community and into the neighborhood, but to stop the hemorrhaging of the loss of home ownership by the folks who are still here. And I'm hoping that as we're looking at options, and I know we have the funds that we're having some oversight over, but there is still that need for how we're going to address those folks who have homes, who are seniors, who need to have a better understanding of how they can stay in those homes. And so I'm hoping that there's going to be a creative way to find more funding that will fit into the mix of the silos of funds that we have to ensure that we don't exacerbate the problem.
Sheila, I would love to get your best recommendations in terms of potential strategies to do that. You know, obviously the first and highest order strategy continues to be mortgage assistance and supports that keep people in their homes rather than displacing them out of their homes. Unfortunately, as you know, that's also a very expensive strategy. And it's no surprise to anybody that the federal government has not been particularly supportive of our efforts. There are things we can do at the local level, however. One of those things, for example, is to provide a diversity of home ownership opportunities in our community. And I have been very aggressive during the 2035 planning strategy and will continue to be aggressive during the residential infill project to provide the kinds of options that modern households look for, whether it's duplexes or triplexes or garden apartments or auxiliary dwelling units. None of those are for everybody, but there should be a wide variety of options that are lower cost than what is currently being provided. And so I seek to expand those opportunities. And then legislatively, there's some things that we can do in partnership with the state government. I was intrigued that you said enlightened public-private partnerships. I'm very interested in public-private partnerships that can actually meaningfully leverage our limited public resources with private resources. So we're going down to Salem in this very, very short session starting in February, and we're asking for a constitutional amendment that allows us to use some of our precious bonding capacity to be leveraged by private sector investments with enlightened private sector partners. That's currently not allowed, and we would like it to be allowed. It's a high bar because we not only have to get it through the legislature, but then we have to explain it all to the public and have them vote in support of it. I'm hopeful that with the right narrative and the right community groups supporting us, we can be successful in that effort, but that's just one more way. But if you guys have other strategies that you can think of, I'd certainly be open-minded.
Great.
I believe it. Any other? Yes, Jillian.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. As you know, part of the issue with the lack of homeownership opportunities has been that over the last 10 years, approximately 1,400 affordable homes have been demolished and rebuilt and now are unaffordable. And I'm wondering if the city has any strategies to try and not just keep people in their homes, but to stop the hemorrhaging of affordable homes, because trying to backfill that 1,400 is way more expensive than preserving it.
So there's probably nothing that angers people more than seeing a good, solid house demolished and having it replaced by a larger single-family house that towers over the rest of the neighborhood that's out of character. It drives people nuts, in addition to driving up home values, which of course ultimately drive up property taxes. And so through the residential infill project, one of the proposals that's being put forward by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is actually limits on the size of replacement houses so that they fit with the character of the neighborhood in which they're located. That will also reduce the incentive to demolish perfectly good existing houses. For me, it is a policy failure to have a single family house demolished and replaced merely by a larger single family house. From a housing supply perspective, that is a policy failure. A policy success would be if somebody knocks down a house that truly is beyond repair and replaces it with a duplex or a triplex or a garden apartment or some increase in the actual supply of housing. That to me is a policy success. Now, before everybody emails me and tells me, oh my God, you're going to build stick houses in my neighborhood, let's all agree we hate bad architecture. And I believe codes and standards can overcome bad architecture, because I've seen presentations and I've seen other communities that have been able to do that. But I do think we have to be open-minded about the ideal that demolishing a house simply so you can build a larger one for profit is not a good policy for us to pursue from either a housing affordability or a housing supply perspective. We have to be smarter than that in terms of the supply that we replace it with.
Thank you. We're running to our time, so Ms. Virgin.
Yes, this committee has also talked about land trusts, buying up land, and I'm thinking of all the monies that are being put into affordable housing for Northeast has grown considerably, but there's nothing that's currently in place to protect those properties so that succession can occur, which would be the ideal, to see generational ownership continue, not just at the current level that we're at right now, but in the future as well. And is there any thought about, or does the city see any value in getting something in place to do this?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. Number one, I think there's a regional role for a model like that. Dr. Bates had mentioned thinking about where African American families are today. A lot of African American families are actually in East Portland and even East Multnomah County outside of the city limits. And much of North and Northeast Portland has frankly been gentrified, right? People have already been displaced. And so the right time to build a land trust to protect those who are in place is before they're displaced. And while the cost of land is relatively inexpensive. And so if I had a limited amount of resources today to pursue a land trust model, I'll be honest with you, I would probably spend most of it where black families are today to protect their interests so they are not displaced again. Now, could we do it in North and Northeast Portland? Sure we can. But let's be honest, we are now at the end of a 10-year real estate boom. The cost is very, very high per unit. Let me give you an alternative view of the world, and this is not a Bernie Sanders endorsement. I just happen to believe that there was one thing that was really his seminal accomplishment in politics that nobody knows about, sort of a trivia thing. Like 40 years ago, when he was, I think he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, he was at least on the city council there, he created the Housing Trust of Burlington, Vermont. And he and his colleagues had this idea, hey, the cost of housing, the biggest part isn't the sticks and bricks, it's the land. And back then, Burlington, Vermont was relatively inexpensive, but they were well aware of those Brahmins moving up, the blue bloods moving up from Boston and jacking up the cost of housing. And so they got this idea, let's buy all the land. And so in certain parts of that community, what you're actually doing is you're buying the house, but the city, the public, owns the land underneath the house, and it's in a permanent land trust. So it's not like they're going to sell it out from under you. It's just the city owns the land, and the cost that you incur and the mortgage that you hold is only for the cost of the housing. And it was a really brilliant strategy at a time decades ahead of when people were really thinking about mass displacement. So here in 2018, thinking about how to create a land trust for North and Northeast Portland isn't exactly a futuristic strategy. It would be reactive after the fact to some degree, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And Dr. Bates had said there are some really good development opportunities on the horizon. If we have locations beyond the ones that she mentioned and we can lock down sites, we should do that. And we actually, weirdly enough, did that with the post office site, even though we paid a premium back then, and now it's starting to look like a pretty good deal. If it turns out that the school district decides to abandon Blanchard, I want to make sure we lock that down. That's not a very well-kept secret, so I'm not breaking any news here. And there are probably other things we can do in the central city, but we should be working regionally, and we should be working with Metro, and we should be working with Gresham and others to talk about how do we actually start securing the land that's there now that is still considered relatively affordable. That's just sort of my big picture view. But yeah, Virgie, a land trust is great, and I'm disappointed that our city and our state didn't think about it 40 years ago. We were slow to the punch, and there were other cities that weren't, that actually did that.
Thank you. Our time has come to an end. I do have one specific thing I'd like you to address, if you could, and just one example of, you mentioned about the wealth opportunities, specifically for African Americans to benefit from or to access or participate in what's going on in terms of development and so forth. Could you speak to one specific thing that is happening or that you're planning or that you see on the horizon and how people can connect to that?
I'll mention two. So we know that some of these developments, the construction community is going to need lots and lots of people at all levels, whether you're a craftsperson, whether you're somebody who is an architect, whether you're somebody who's a draft person, whether you are somebody who's an electrician or a plumber or a pipe fitter, whether you are a subcontractor, drive a truck, a potential contractor, even a potential prime. There will be tons of opportunities in this community for the foreseeable future, pretty much regardless of what happens to the economy. So the question is really only how big does the boom continue to be in the years ahead, since people are still going to continue to move here, whether we have a strong economy or a recessionary economy. People are still coming here. So the question for me isn't, are jobs going to be here? The question is, are people going to have the education and the job training required to be able to qualify for the opportunities when they land here? They'll land here for another reason. The average age of a tradesperson in the city of Portland today is 47 years old. And that means a lot of the high-skilled, high-wage labor that we have in this community is going to retire in the very near future. And we as a culture need to start talking to our young folks about the great opportunities that exist to be in those fields. That's sort of one piece of it. Working through work systems, our 25 by 25 strategy, working with private sector contractors and subcontractors to create those pathways to education and job training to employment directly. That's one piece. And we have not done a very good job in that department. That's not to say there aren't some great organizations who've made those commitments, but I just think on the whole we have not done as good a job as we could. The second area is, and I'll just give you a piece that we just completed, it is far from a perfect resolution, but we just completed our CEIP process around contracting and subcontracting. And it was a community-led conversation. It was very, very a dynamic conversation, as it always is, and we landed on what I thought was a very, very good solution, having worked with trades and NAMCO and people who train young people for opportunities in the trades. And we came to something of a compromise solution in the final formation of the CEIP, but I was really proud of that work, and I think the community should be justifiably proud of that work because it opens up more opportunities for women and people of color to actually benefit from development in the community economically rather than be impacted by the development in our community. So as the community thrives and prospers and grows and develops, I want to make sure that historically underserved and under-included communities actually benefit along with the development. And those are just sort of two random thoughts I have, one that's concrete and completed, and the other where I think there's a call to action and a desire on my part to do better in terms of creating pathways to education and job training, particularly, but not exclusively, for young people.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being with us tonight. And we look forward to continued engagement and hopefully your presence.
I'd like to come back more frequently, and I apologize. My schedule has been ridiculously frenetic, but this is a priority for me, and the work you do around this table is a priority. So I look forward to coming back. Cupid represents me well, but I think I need to be here as well. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Our next group, then, is our interstate project update from the Reach and the Argyle site. Reach Community Development.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having us here. I'm Jessica Woodruff, the Director of Development at REACH.
And I'm Lucy Corbett, Housing Development Project Manager for this project.
And are our slides, are they? Do we have to do anything to?
Leave a clicker somewhere? I don't have the clicker to give.
All right. Thank you. So this is we actually have a very brief update. We just have a couple things we thought were important for us to update this group tonight. So we'll do that pretty briefly and then, of course, be available for questions. So as you can see on the screen, we are just updating you on where we're at on the program. We have the last couple meetings, we've updated you on the financial challenges of this project. And so just to remind everybody where we've landed through our work going through that with TriMet and Portland Housing Bureau, this is now a 198 unit, 100% affordable housing project, no commercial component. And part of the reason we wanted to update you on that tonight, again, is that we did let the Canton Neighborhood Association know of those changes, or at least the change in the commercial, in December, and they were very concerned about that change. So we offered to go to the Canton Neighborhood Association meeting last night. Again, we had, I think that was maybe the third time we had been in front of them to provide updates along the way. And of course, a good group of people at the meeting, so diverse perspectives, but some really clear frustration with the removal of the commercial space and the history of some conversations with Prosper Portland. So we wanted to let you know where we landed on that as the neighborhood asked. They asked if we had talked with Prosper Portland about financial support for the commercial, which we updated them that we had over the past year. We'd had a couple conversations. And they asked if we would be willing to clarify that with Prosper Portland with them. So we have said that we would reach out to Prosper Portland and kind of further clarify that they will not be putting commercial funding to this project, or as the neighborhood would like to do is to ask, would they reconsider that? So we wanted to provide that update. So we're going to continue to just work through, keeping the neighborhood informed and also talking about what we might do with that space. Additionally, we wanted to let you know just the project schedule, no major change from the last time we talked with this group. A big piece I did want to know, it was just an interesting thing that I have learned over the last couple months that I thought, again, this group would appreciate knowing. So we are planning to apply for LIFT funding, which is state funding, to fill the remaining project gap. And I've been, quite frankly, a little bit shocked at how many of our peers in the metro area have the same strategy. So there's $33 million available statewide. So it will go fast. So we are going to do our best to put in a successful application, but we did just want to let this group know that that is a little bit of a concern for us given how competitive those funds will be, and we will keep you informed. We will hear back on that funding in April. And then at the same time, we'll be submitting for a permit, and if successful with that LIFT funding, we'll be closing our financing in August. So here's just a brief update of the imagery, and part of what we just wanted to make sure everybody was clear, because there has been some potential miscommunication, but we did remove the commercial component, but we actually didn't change the design. So what that means is what was commercial space is now community space. So we just thought this kind of helps see that still will look like commercial space, but we will not be leasing it out. There's another view of the project. And then lastly, we just wanted to let you know that we are still working on defining our contracting and workforce participation. So we will come back to the group to give an update when we feel like that's in its best place. That's it.
That's it, okay. Questions, Oversight Committee? Yes, sir.
So my concern is the type of units, the number of them. Again, we're talking about affordable housing, and again, it's for families. 53 studios, 89 one-bedrooms, of course, and then only 9 3-bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. And again, I like to connect that with the LIFT funding. I think you might have an added advantage in asking for LIFT funding if you could improve that 3-bedroom number. Because again, we're trying to house families. These aren't single individuals. Families are being displaced, not persons, families. And 9 3-bedrooms in a 198 unit building, that doesn't make sense to me. A lot of families now are not just husband and wife and children, but grandmother, grandpa, folks to help raise the little ones. I forget the term you use, but intergenerational families. So folks are living together, and it benefits everyone in the community when that's possible. Can't do that with 9 bedrooms, with 9 3-bedroom units. And I understand it's a business, and folks are looking to make money, but again, I think you would have an added advantage. You said there's only 33 million. If you come with a proposal showing a substantial improvement in housing multiple families at a greater number, that's what I can tell you I have an issue there. And also with your design, I remember when we originally spoke, we wanted it to look like something that's part of the community. These are all like closed-in apartments where you're just looking out a window at the park across the street. There's no balconies. You just look like a regular tenant housing building. Like that wouldn't be something that would look enjoyable to live in as far as the community is concerned. And I remember those were concerns that we had brought to you all originally, that it be open space, that I can see my neighbor and I'm not just staring out of a window looking at either Columbia Boulevard or the park across the street from a window that I can't open.
So I appreciate your feedback. It's all very, I take that to heart. One thing you may not recall, but you actually in particular had quite an impact on our project. You were at the TriMet selection process where we actually, the largest units that we proposed through that selection process were 2 bedrooms, and we had a conversation, I think at the first Oversight Committee meeting, where you made some really good points and actually were part of both you and then our first public meeting with the neighborhood, where we heard a strong desire for 3 bedrooms. So we agree 9 3-bedrooms are not a lot, but that is something that we did in terms of from the time that we were selected to do the project to now that we've actually added in community response. And with the design, again, I appreciate what you say, and we've gone through a pretty extensive design process with our architect going to neighborhood focus groups. And so I think it is, I definitely hear what you say, and we've gotten a lot of different feedback. So we are proud of the work that we have done with the community to try to get that feedback, but understand what we don't. It doesn't necessarily please everybody. I don't know if you have.
I just wanted to add that one of the challenges that we are running into with this site in particular is that we're actually have a zoning minimum. And so we can't go under a certain number of units. And so that's part of the unit mix that you see, is if we dramatically change that to larger bedrooms, we would actually fall under our zoning minimum for number of units per the amount of land that we have here, with the amount of subsidy that we were awarded.
A question. So I'm just curious why the decision was made not to redesign when you got rid of the commercial aspect of the property, and how much, if you could remind me, what that square footage is.
It's about 8,000 square feet. So we have done some redesign in a minimal way, but there's two main reasons we didn't remove it all. One, because we heard really strongly from the neighborhood group about that commercial presence, like wanting that kind of an anchor in Kenton, ultimately wanting it to be active ground floor. We also have design review that will have active ground floor requirements. And quite frankly, we heard a lot of desire from the community and our focus groups about community events and community space. So when we looked at all the trade-offs and all of these different, kind of issues that we were dealing with, we did decide to retain the majority of that space because we thought ultimately it was a benefit to the project still.
So, two questions really. One, you were surprised about the competition for the funding this round. Why is it? I'm just curious. But more specifically, as it relates to the design of the property, and I probably shouldn't know this, but what is the percentage of commercial to community space that you're talking about on the ground floor? Or is it all community?
It's now all community space.
It's now all community. No, okay. And then, as a sustainable development, what are the components of it that makes it sustainable?
We are required to meet the City of Portland's green building policy, and in this case, it is a LEED Gold standard or equivalent. And so that is what we plan to meet, which includes a number of different measures, but I could give you the measures, but there's a number of ways to get to that level of LEED Gold, building envelope, air quality, sustainable materials, things like that.
And to your first question about why I was surprised, I think I was surprised because I've been really involved at the state level advocating for that resource. And when the first round came out, the initial round of funding, which was, I think it was 2 years ago, there, maybe because it was a new source, there wasn't extreme demand for it. They actually didn't have enough applicants to meet the original intent of the program, so they funded additional deals outside of their initial intent. And maybe just the time and what's going on in our state with the housing emergency everywhere in every community, rural and urban, and that people had some time to plan for it. There's a very different, I know of at least 10 deals in the city of Portland that are contemplating going in for the resource. It pairs really well with 4% bond program. There's many for-profit developers who have realized it as a resource for them to compete at the state, and so there's a lot of people throwing deals in, I think, to see what can happen. So I think it's a good thing for the state that there's that many developers who are going to try to use it, but it does, of course, create a competition that makes it much more uncertain.
And my final question on this is, okay, so if the design is going to be as pictured, you have a very dark facade and ceiling on a major portion of the building. And as you know, that attracts heat, holds heat. And you have folks who are going to be living in close proximity. And I'm just curious about if that's going to actually be the way it's designed. When I look at the landscaping, there's not a lot of protection for the windows for heat migration in and out of the space. So did you take any of that into consideration? I'm thinking of the quality of living in the development for folks who might move in.
I can say as for the colors of the renderings and things like that, none of that is really final. So, I think we have the ability to change that based on some community feedback. As for the landscaping, this will be a very energy efficient building, and it will also be have the capacity for air conditioning, which I know is becoming more and more of a requirement given the changes in the climate. So we are planning for comfortable building. We don't intend for it to be uncomfortable for people to live there.
My question is also about the building design. You mentioned having a number of community focus groups, about the building and about this commercial space. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about who were those focus groups with? Who's the community that you were engaging in that process?
Of course. Yeah, so we can definitely remind the group about that. So we've done, and Lucy, just chime in if I'm forgetting anything, because we've been doing this for about a year. So the main groups in terms of that are sort of existing groups: Kenton Neighborhood Association, Kenton Business Association. Additionally, like in all REACH developments, we have just what we call just public meetings, where there are meetings that we advertise as widely as we can. The day that we had our first public meeting was the same day as the Women's March, and we did not have a good turnout, obviously for bigger issues. And then an additional strategy that we've used, which on this project was, I think, we felt was really successful, was going to our existing Northeast affordable housing family projects. So knowing that we had, the population that would be the intended target audience. And our resident services staff hold regular meetings. We got on the agendas of those meetings. We went along with our architects, and that's when, I don't know if you recall, we had shown in previous meeting our precedent studies that we did, where we put up all kinds of examples from actually all across the US and some other countries, and we allowed people to vote and talk about things that, things, whether it be colors or what kinds of things would they hope that they would have in a community space. And so that's with REACH tenants who already have affordable housing, so they're not necessarily going to be the people that live there, but are the target audience, and did a number of those. So does that answer your question?
Thank you. Are you using the preference policy at all in this whole plan? How are you able to reach the people that have been displaced?
So we will. So we are definitely committed to that. We, of course, are early enough on that we have not started our lease-up process. That's quite a ways out for us. So we've met with Portland Housing Bureau staff. Of course, we've participated in these meetings and tracking the progress of the developers that are going before us with that. We've also been talking with our peers that we know are going through it, like Bridge and PCRI, to keep informed. So this, we are definitely following the preference policy on this program. We just aren't there yet to the lease-up process.
Something that was mentioned earlier, I want to go back to it as we were talking about types of units, size, and so forth. You mentioned about a threshold in order for funding. What is that threshold?
What I was referring to is that we received the $10 million for this project from the Portland Housing Bureau, and that can only go to, we can only use that to get to a project of such size. So with the rest of the financing that we're putting together, that I think that if we transition to a much higher proportion of 3-bedroom households, we would fall below the zoning minimum that we have in this case, where we can, I think, only build no less than 180 units at this site. So it limits us in the types of units that we can build.
So in your feedback from the community, I know that our Oversight Committee has talked very specifically and repeatedly in regard to family-size units as it relates to affordable housing. So in your community feedback, as you presented this information, what has the response been?
So, kind of as I referenced before, Marlon was one of the first people that brought up that thinking that we just had to have some 3 bedrooms here. Other than that, I would say the only place it came up for us, but did come up, was in the outreach to our existing Northeast affordable housing properties. When we talked about what are the needs in the community, we heard from them that they also thought 3 bedrooms to add to this would be important. So that's why we did add that. So those were really the 2 forums that we heard that.
And then the last question for me, as I look at 30% AMI, we're talking about a total of 20 units? Mm-hmm. Expand on that, as in the reasoning behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that also is an issue of the economics of the deal. So when we applied to the TriMet request for qualifications, we anticipated we would be able to get support from Home Forward to serve 30% tenants, and we were not. They are no longer doing that for developers. They've changed their policy for the short term, given the federal changes. So that was the most Reach could really commit to doing without any subsidy so this is a 100% tax credit project with Portland Housing Bureau TIF support, but there's no Section 8 subsidy. So when again we are trying to meet those requirements of zoning minimum, and of course we can't actually exactly get there. We're going to need LIFT to even be successful to get us there, but that was something we felt was important to put in, even though we did not have the support of or the ability to get Home Forward subsidy, but clearly it's not many of the units.
And so my last question would be then, if there is no LIFT funding, what's the plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've had this conversation with Portland Housing Bureau and TriMet to talk about contingency planning. So there's sort of 2 main approaches to that. One, with a deal of this scale, you could build a portion of it and then build the rest of it later as you get the funding ready. That would require a subdivision and a lot of challenge, a lot more expense, a lot more time, but it is a possibility that we have as we're talking about Portland Housing Bureau, TriMet, and Reach together to get this deal done. Another potential is you wait a year, right, and you go for the next round of LIFT. And lastly, of course, if there's, which we've had this conversation with Portland Housing Bureau, but and we're definitely told it was not an option at this time, but another option would be if there is additional Portland Housing Bureau money available, that would be another strategy. So where we left it with Portland Housing Bureau was we would go for this LIFT application. We would do our best to score as high as we can and get this funded. But of course, if that is, we hope to be calling PHB in April and saying that is funded. But if that's not the case, we'd be having a meeting with PHB to say, and TriMet to say, what strategy do we go for now?
Yes.
Okay, I have one last question for you
Mm-hmm.
and comment. My question is, REACH has been around a long time and one of the oldest CDCs in the city, and you had great success in projects you've built all over. Next time you come in March, you're going to be talking about how you'll be true to the mission of what we're all sitting around the table here about, being able to provide opportunities for people of color in the development of your housing, as well as being able to move into your housing. And so I'd like to know what you've done to do just that historically. How successful was it? And what are you going to do differently this time to see even better results? So would you be prepared to kind of share that with us? So if there's some lessons learned that can make the next go round even better?
So let me address that, Sheila, by saying that as you're not answering for them, but to support what you're saying, I think that is definitely something we would be highly interested in for our next meeting. And I don't think we can overemphasize that the work that's gone into bringing us to this moment, and through a variety of community forums through the city, not just here locally, but even in East County, as you heard the mayor mention earlier, about families that have been displaced. Repeatedly what we heard was family size units. And to look at what we're presently presenting is extremely disappointing, nearly off-putting. And I understand the challenge around it. So as we begin looking at this next phase, my anticipation is that considerable effort will be given to accomplish the broadest reach and the most successful connection to those who've been impacted by displacement to benefit from what's being presented. So.
Yeah, and just to briefly respond, yes. We do intend to do that, just so it's something that we are talking about at the senior management level and board level at REACH a lot, and intend to come with a plan that both builds on our long history. I think the benefit of that long history is that we have some proven things that will work, and we also have learned from some mistakes. So we hope to come to you with a plan, but also get your feedback on the plan. So the plan won't be done when we bring it to you. Our plan is going to be our first crack at something we think is getting us in the right direction, and get some advice. And then we'll finalize it, because we won't be, best case scenario, we won't be signing a construction contract until August.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Our next group is Bridge. Welcome.
So I'm Destin Ford. I'm from Bridge Housing. I'm sitting in for Trina Whitman, who is unfortunately sick, and I believe both Andrew and I are sick, so please bear with us here.
I'm healed. I'm healed. I was sick, though.
So Bridge Housing, we can talk a little bit about a project overview of the North Williams project, and then give you a design update, talk a little bit about the conditional use process we're currently under, talk a little bit about funding status, and you're going to hear a lot of the same things that you heard from Jessica, and then introduce Colas Construction, who we've just selected through an RFQ, and I'm really pleased to work with Andrew Colas again on the project. We are doing 61 units of primarily family housing. There are 40 units of project-based vouchers. We were lucky enough to get an award from Home Forward before they cut off their awards. So that means that 40 of the families will pay no more than 30% of their income in rent. We are under the preference policy and eager to engage with our partners on that and to implement that. I think there's 2 projects ahead of us. And then depending on the funding, REACH might be ahead of us as well in the conditional use process. We have just finished the schematic design process on the building. We did do outreach to the community. We hired a design culture lab to do a pretty robust outreach and imaging effort. There was a real desire from both the neighborhood group and from the community to keep softer and more northwest materials. So we moved away from a brick facade, which I think is what you all had seen previously, and tried to bring some residential elements in, balconies and some heavy timber trellises around the perimeter, and try to get a little more growth on the outside of the building. Here's a little street view associated with the community entry on the ground floor. The site does fall away to one of the sides of the property, so as we introduce ground floor units to the property, they are held back from the street, and they are also up from the street, so they're more defensible. They do have stoops and exterior entries as well on it. We've added a little bit of articulation to make the building kind of break down in scale a little bit from the street facade. We are separating from the nearby small multifamily and single-family residential by a parking lot and landscaping. We've got a central back courtyard, which is going to have some play structures in it, and has, of course, visible eyes on it from the living rooms that surround the back on the courtyard. This is taking a look at the site plan. There's a number of interesting things that are happening on this site. I think I'd call your attention, if you don't recall from previous discussions, that this is previously a battery manufacturing and storage facility, so we went through quite an extensive process with the Department of Environmental Quality in order to get rights to acquire and remediate the property. That was our first steps, and then we moved into a land use process because the two zoning codes that apply to this property were in direct conflict on their requirements. And so in order to do the 61-unit building, we actually have to go through a conditional use, which means that we want to ask for special privileges to develop this building on this property. We have another option, which is to wait for a new zoning code to come into place. It was supposed to come into place in January 1, and it will now is being slated to come into place middle of the year. But the conditional use process was introduced to us by the city as being the fastest way to get to construction. We submitted October 2nd. We are currently under review and have gotten notes completed for going back in for hopefully a completeness check in 35 days to a hearing date. We are having a traffic and parking issue right now that we're trying to work through, which has been a little bit intransient, but we're working with the city on that effort. Funding status, I mean, as you have probably heard from other groups, we've seen some pretty significant construction cost increases over the last couple of years since funding, which we are fighting. We have recently, again, got Andrew Colas from Colas Construction on board to do some construction pricing for us, but I think he's going to find, like everyone has, that the prices have gone up quite considerably. We've got some numbers in our current pro formas based on recent projects that we've undertaken. The tax reform process, again, dropping the 35% tax rate to 21% tax rate is affecting our yield for the tax credit equity, which has also introduced a pretty sizable gap. So we are also looking at LIFT funds along with a lot of other groups to fill our gap. And I can give you the same kind of answers, is that there's another funding round if we don't get the most recent funding round of LIFT. After that, we can look at other sources of funds, from 9% tax credits to Portland Housing Bureau funds to other, hopefully, county funds or other sources. Metro is going to be issuing a bond as well, it looks like, or pushing for a bond as well. If we don't get that, we have been able to gather about $1 million, a little bit less than $1 million in funds over the last year from Metro associated with transit-oriented development. We are looking at some energy efficiency dollars associated with it, and then we've got some EPA brownfield sources that we are also seeking associated with the contamination of the site. But PHB has indicated that they have no additional funds to us as well, and they've also indicated that they have no funds to provide for pre-development funding. until we can show that our gap is filled. And so we are working at finding pre-development funding. It looks like Bridge is likely to provide that pre-development funding. It's quite a significant risk. We're probably looking at over $1 million in pre-development before we'd know about full funding on the project. And we will continue looking at every source we possibly can for the project. So with that, again, we went through an RFQ process, and I'm super pleased to work with Colas Construction again. And I will turn it over to Andrew to talk about recent efforts.
Thank you. I'm Andrew Colas. I'm the president of Colas Construction. Obviously, we're a little far out from going out to bid on this project. It's probably not going to be starting for another year or so, but the work starts now when we look at projects like this. When we're going through our first pricing exercise, which we're just getting into, typically you're going out getting feedback from subcontractors, getting their pulse on where the market is, where the environment is. And we've just over our 20 plus years in business really built long-standing relationships, specifically within the minority contracting community. It's something that we're passionate about. It's something that's been a part of our mission. We don't do it on projects because they have goals. We do it on projects because we believe that's the right thing to do. So we'll be doing that throughout the course of this project. Every project that we've worked on, if you see a Colas Construction sign, we're putting people to work from the minority community. That's just something that we do. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we're gonna have to develop some extravagant contracting plan, because just through the course of the work that we do, construction's about relationships, and we've built those relationships, and as our company has the fortune to grow, we're going to help other companies grow. So just overall on this project, we're really excited to work with Bridge Housing. They developed an RFQ process that made it so that we could go after this project. A lot of these projects and a lot of project owners, they develop project RFQs that make it so that a company like ours can't go after it, and we don't even consider going after it. Bridge definitely developed a plan that made us believe that they were serious about trying to bring equity to the project. So we're excited to work with them on this project. And then, the other big key point of it is the workforce, making sure that as we get subcontractors on and as we're able to continuously keep different subs working, they're able to grow their workforce. So that's the exciting thing for us being on projects like this, is that we know, okay, when we finish this job, we have another job to look forward to, and we're able to communicate that to the subs that we're helping grow so that they feel confident that they can grow out their management teams as well. So we're excited to work on this project. We'll look forward to communicating with this group as we actually get this project out to bid, but I'm confident that we'll exceed the goals on this project. We do on every single project that we work on, and it'll be something that can help foster and build a larger construction force that has more people of color. That's something that I'm really passionate about, and I don't want to just see it at the field level. I want to be able to see it at the management level as well. That's something that we really emphasize as a company, and we've been successful at. So we're just excited to work with Bridge. They're a large-scale organization that's interested in achieving these kind of goals. So we're excited to be a part of the team.
So our next steps are, of course, getting CEO approval so that we can get in under design development. We're hoping to do that again very shortly. Looking for applying for the LIFT funds to fill the financing gap. With the design development kickoff, we're going to be looking more again with DMWESB focus for professional consultants, and we'll probably be doing design build and working on. Oh, sorry. Good. So we're working on the DMWESB for more professional consultants into our workforce, and then working into getting to some design build efforts going, which will involve Colas Construction and some subcontractors for that design. And then, of course, engaging in the preference policy to make sure that it is robust and long-term for all the rental housing with the other nonprofits and PHB. So, and with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Questions from the Oversight Committee?
Just a quick question as it relates to your conditional use approval. Is it adding additional costs to your project, and how much of a time delay?
It is adding minor additional costs to the project. Quite honestly, our other path was to go through the design review process, which would be fairly expensive as well. So we have a land use consultant on the project, and we have a traffic engineer that we wouldn't otherwise have on the project right now. It's probably slightly more expensive than it would be otherwise, but the time savings, we're looking, one of the recent contractors told us it was about 4%, I think it was 4% a quarter right now in cost growth. Works out to about 36% increase in construction cost over the time since we received the NOFA award. So construction cost and timing is really, the quicker you can get to build, the better off you are.
I was looking at the numbers, and I have to say that I'm impressed with almost the reverse of what I saw in the previous presentation, where you have put in almost 30% into 3-bedroom units out of your total units. And then the next layer for 2-bedroom is about 50%. And then the ones that are smaller 1-bedrooms seem to be more in line with what would attract families that need housing. So I wanted to compliment you on taking the initiative to reach out to families.
And we're certainly really pleased that Portland Housing Bureau encouraged the larger family units, especially in this location in the inner city. And it was a fun factor of the design process that we were actually able to add some 2-bedroom units, just because of the way the units stack up through the building and how tight the building is. So we've actually been able to increase that recently.
Can you give us a number of your funding gap? What is the gap?
I'd have a hard time doing that. I would estimate conservatively that we're in the $2 million range, but I really need Andrew to provide us with some good numbers to take a look at. And we're doing a bunch of outreach right now, because obviously the tax reform effort is brand new, to find out where people are going to be, where investors and lenders are going to be in the turn. We had a project with Portland Housing Bureau just before the new year, where we had gotten the ultimatum that if we didn't close by December 31st, they were going to yank their offers, the investors and lenders. So we're in a very new time, and it's going to take a little sussing out, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Marlon?
One's a question and a comment. My first question is, I noticed on the project overview something says PBV. What does that represent?
Yeah, that's unfortunately there's way too many acronyms in affordable housing. Project-based vouchers or project-based Section 8 vouchers. Those are vouchers that are provided by Home Forward, the housing authority, that pay for the difference between the rent and 30% of the person's income. And so the person never has to pay more than 30% of their income in rent. Everything else is available for food and medical expenses, for economic and education and other gains. It's a great way to make sure that people are able to lift up.
All right. And my other thing is as a comment, I wanted to thank you for the design presentation. As far as the building, it doesn't just look like a brick tenement building. So I really appreciate that. And the second thing is thank you for bringing Colas Construction here. I don't remember ever having someone bring a Black-owned construction company to a meeting. So that's pretty awesome.
Questions?
The, is it 40 project-based vouchers? Are those going to be permanently restricted to 30% of AMI and under, or if the vouchers were to go away, what would the income restriction on those 40 units be?
I am not sure if I can answer that, and I should be able to. I believe that they are not restricted to be at 30% if the vouchers went away. But I believe that there is a sequence of how you turn those units and how long they would remain. and I'm pretty sure I said that correctly. One of the nice things about Bridge, if I can plug them for a minute, is that they are a very large organization and very committed to their tenants, and have coffers to help in these kind of situations. So typically, it would be true of any nonprofit, but I would say especially with Bridge, we'd be able to transfer things slowly so as not to displace people. I'm very hopeful that we're not going to be in any of those situations. I don't know if you followed the budget process about a year ago, but they had talked about every other program that HUD had going away in order to support the voucher program maintaining. So that's a pretty dramatic thing. All CDBG, all home, all the other efforts that the entire organization does in favor of the support, rental assistance support.
So related to that, if the ones that are PVV units at this point, you have someone who come in with the voucher, get stabilized, start making more money and is able to move out, is that still a PV designated unit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Preference policy update. Good evening.
So I'm not Victoria. I'm going to be sitting in place of her. She is out on vacation, but I typically work on the hotline and I work with managing the wait list. So it's a team effort. Divisha. Mm-hmm. So this is just a brief overview of what I'm going to cover. In this presentation, it's a fairly short presentation, so if you have any questions, feel free to also interject. Also, I tend to talk quickly, so if you need me to repeat anything, don't hesitate to let me know. To just give a brief overview on Cascadia Behavioral Health. So it is a private, not-for-profit organization routinely serving those with mental health and those battling with mental health disabilities and drug addiction, but they have expanded, of course, to provide housing to those who struggle with those ailments, as well as those who are community members. So we're working with them. They chose to utilize the preference policy to lease up 33 of their units. It's a total of 52 units. That number is updated since then, so it's 33 that are going to be reserved for the preference policy instead of 31. Anticipated move-ins is February 2018. We are solely sending the list to them for them to perform screening on those tenants on those potential tenants who are at the top of our waiting list. And just a little note, so disbursement of the studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, is not definite, so we don't know exactly how many are being allotted to our preference policy, because of course it's dependent on their household size, so there aren't finite numbers on that, if that was a tidbit you wanted to know about. These are the numbers as of 12/21/18. We have a larger number now of individuals, or excuse me, a few adjustments that have happened. So for eminent domain, instead of 15, it's now 17 applicants on that list. For the 6-point cohort, it is 133. All of the other corresponding numbers remain the same, but we had 736 total applicants for this round. And that's just through promotions through newspaper, promotions through posting flyers, and also, of course, word of mouth. And then we made contact with those who applied for our previous round. That way they were notified of this housing opportunity, because there were a number of people who were rescinded from the homeownership round. So we made sure to reach out to those individuals as well so they can apply. As we go to the next slide, it provides Actually, okay, this is the one I have. I'll go back in a minute here. It provides race data just solely on our eminent domain applicants, just for the public. Eminent domain, those who either they themselves or their parent, guardian, or grandparents had property that was taken by the city. This is that list, those people who claimed that address and were therefore verified. So this is our data on that. As you can see, it's high for the African American population, therefore targeting those who were most impacted by those urban renewal efforts. And I'm going to go back to the main one. So this is our entire list from the 6-point cohort all the way down to the 0-point cohort. We have a breakdown of age and we have a breakdown of race. I will say that the data is slightly flawed as most people selected more than one race. So this captures that. So that's why you will see kind of an overcount in the data. I do want to take a moment and take note here. There is a large number, and we saw this in the last round. I did a mini sort of behavioral economics a mini data look at those who applied last year. It's mostly those who range in the ages from 24 to 34. We have made plans, we, meaning myself, Victoria, Matt, our team, have made plans to expand out to the other age demographics. I'm finding that my senior applicants, those most vulnerable, they want to rent as well. So I'm trying to partner with the organizations that cater to those populations so we can have better outreach efforts for those individuals as well. It's also next to it, very small, sorry for that, it's a breakdown of race by the applicants as well, as from 6-point cohort to the 0-point cohort. This is another breakdown, but next to it, you will see that most of the eminent domain applicants, those who claimed eminent domain and those who were proven, it was taken as a result of the Emmanuel expansion. We had a lot of research we did for the home ownership round, and we were able to compile a list, and it made it more strategically easier, I'm just gonna say easier to compare those who claimed against that list, as well as minimizing the amount of research we had to do to go out to Portland City Archives, the library, and confirm that information. So we found in our research, combined with the list that we had compiled in our data, in our office, that it was mostly Emmanuel's expansion that displaced the people who applied for this round. And that concludes that presentation. Any questions or concerns or?
Okay, just a quick question as it relates to the numbers. So how does it, with the eminent domain, you have 15, and we
17 now, yes.
Excuse me?
17 now.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. So the others get a set of points attached to them. Mm-hmm. And so does that mean first priority would be the 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s?
After the eminent domain folks, yes.
So, so if move-in starts in February, mm-hmm. do you have a sense of what the makeup is of those that have gone through the process and have been selected already for move-in?
Yes, so that is data that we are still retrieving. The list of 15, because the 2 were added on after that list had been sent. We don't have feedback just yet from Cascadia Behavioral Health. The last update I received was that they have scheduled interviews with 10 of them. So they are still sort of in the beginnings of their lease up. And to my knowledge, I believe it says February, but the end of March is really when they're getting, they anticipate having move-ins scheduled. So I expect to get that data sometime around towards mid-January, towards the end of January, beginning of February, because of what they're doing with their process. So the rest of the units were leased up through another strategy. They have PBV units that they have, so they were managing that list as well as managing the list of applicants that we're giving them. So I'm assuming that's the reason for the delay in getting that information back to us in regards to who is actually going to be the makeup of tenants from our preference policy.
Any other questions?
My question is, how is the preference policy overlaying with the priorities of Cascadia? So you said that Cascadia, the housing is for drug and alcohol treatment and mentally ill, and yet there's also the preference policy in there. So how do those two priorities work together, and was that a factor in how the original list was compiled?
So no, because they opted into this program. I want to make sure I mention that. And because they opted in, it's like they gave us those 33 units to lease up, to use the strategy to lease those up. So there's no overlay. I don't get that data for PBB, and they get the names that we give them based on how individuals are prioritized. So there's not necessarily an overlay or a layering of preferences. I am privy to how they strategize around those who suffer with the mental and drug addiction and mental and physical disabilities. They have their own point system to lease those up for their PBV units, but it's the most I interact with that is just referring individuals who are on our preference list who inquire about it, or I just tell them on the phone that this is another way that you can apply depending on what they share with me. So.
The reason that I'm asking is because several of the recipients of that have been coming and giving us updates also have competing and different, we've heard that they have different sources of funding, and some of those require certain things and I'm just curious how those are going to meld together with the preference policy. So there are some organizations which have a set aside for veterans. So how are they going to prioritize serving veterans and use the preference policy at the same time? So I didn't know if that had been worked out, but apparently that with this project.
Yeah, so Matthew Schaubold with the Housing Bureau. I'm not aware of the veterans example, but with the two buildings we'll be advertising for next, the Beatrice Morrow, which is a PCRI building, and then who's just named, the Charlotte B. Rutherford, which is an interstate building. They'll be the next round, and we'll probably release the application. We'll be looking at releasing it in February. We are still working through some issues with the project-based Section 8 vouchers because Home Forward has conditions on their funding, just like we have put the preference policy as a condition on Housing Bureau funding. And so Home Forward has some very complicated rules around leasing project-based units, and we're looking at how we can integrate our process that the Housing Bureau has for collecting applications and prioritizing through the preference policy and the rules that Home Forward has to comply with, and really recipients of their vouchers have to comply with when advertising the project-based units, managing the wait list, and managing that leasing process. So I think it's something that I'm hoping it's something we're going to be able to work through in the next couple of months with Home Forward, but also the nonprofit partner organizations. But what I would say is that depending on the supplemental preference, it may be challenging, and at times there may be some where it is not possible. One that we are struggling with right now is there are some preferences for survivors of domestic violence. And frankly, we cannot have access to who these individuals are that are being prioritized for survivor units because of confidentiality, nor do we want the level of personal information we would need to verify that. And so we're having discussions right now about how is it we can reconcile these preferences so that we can stay true to the conditions that we have put on our funding, understanding that other sources of funds that have gone into some of these projects have conditions as well. So we can bring back an update, but I want to be really upfront. It's an emerging challenge we're trying to figure out how to work through.
It's definitely a huge challenge. I would love an update next time, if possible, on how that's going.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the Oversight Committee?
And on the number of units, it says 31 and then 52 apartments. What's the other 21?
Those will be disseminated the PBV, so the PBV and VASH. So it'll be those two, and then of course one is reserved for the manager. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Real quick, to clarify from Ms. Holden, your question. So in looking at the numbers, so based on who I sent over so far, I can give a preliminary analysis. Forgive me, I'm a little tired. I worked a little late last night. Age demographic will be kind of similar to the data that presented here. It'll be the 24 to 34 range. It'll be largely African American. So likely the 10 people that they are interviewing and moving forward with are between those age ranges and that race. I hope that answers your question. Close, okay. Of course, with the update, we'll have more of a better analysis.
So one comment, and Sheila, let me know if I don't answer the question. This is a bit of a unique situation because Cascadia volunteered these units. We didn't put any money into the development, but they have been willing to kind of comply with what we would do normally with somebody we funded, and that is that if they choose, when they get the list of the 15 people or the list to fill up the units, if they choose to pass someone by to go to the next person on the list, they have agreed to let us know the reason for that. Because they do have their own screening criteria that they're working with. We didn't fund them. We can't tell them what their screening criteria are. Divisha has helped provide guidance on what screening criteria would probably be best to reach our target market. But as they move through the list, if they do pass anybody, they will tell us why, and we'll be able to report back. Of the top 50 people on the list, 12 people were not offered an apartment unit because they were over income, or they didn't meet this particular screening criteria, or they didn't respond. But they're still working through that, so we don't have that data yet.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation. Appreciate the effort and the energy into tonight's meeting. We've got 2 people who've signed up for public comment, and so if you had the desire to speak tonight, this is the form that we would need. We want to capture some information and make sure that we can correspond with you accordingly. And so our first person, Jeff, is it Strange or Strang? Jeff Strang. Jeff, you're going to have 3 minutes.
Yes, Chair Holt and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Strang, and I'm chair of an economic nonprofit called Common Ground, Oregon, Washington. And we advocate for fair payment for private use of the earth and natural resources. And one thing that Chair Wheeler referred to is the historic undercutting at the African community building wealth. And the flip side of that is the inequitable building of wealth on the part of European Americans. Ever since the settling of Oregon in the 1800s and taking over Native American land and giving 320 acres to every European American man and 320 acres to his European American wife, mostly in the Willamette Valley, the fertile Willamette Valley. We've had an inequitable economic system. And I appreciate this committee's work on housing, affordable housing projects, but I'd like to urge you to also think about ways we might restructure the economic system to provide for a better environment for affordable housing. For example, the land value in Multnomah County in 2007 was about $28 billion. Now it's a little over $51 billion. Now, if that increase in the land value, the privately owned land value, was harvested and given out to our residents, it would give every resident of 3 years or more, including kids, $200 a month. And so that, by restructuring the economic system, would help provide for affordable housing. One of the problems with having a highly inflating land market is that speculators and money from outside comes in and then makes property ownership unaffordable to the younger generation. So just urging you to keep some of these economic system restructuring possibilities in the back of your mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good timing also. Very well done. Next. Oh, we've got others? Good. Others coming in? Linda, Tellis Kennedy. Hi, Linda.
Buddy.
You have
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
So first, I just want to say thank you for your time and your effort, talking to the committee here, and being a voice for the displaced residents of the Northeast community, the African American community. Thank you for overseeing the decisions being made by our city's bureaus and departments that directly and indirectly impact the African American community. Thank you for your service, and I mean that sincerely and with all gratitude. On October 12, 2017, the Portland Housing Bureau presented the need for a preference policy down payment subsidy to increase from $80,000 to $100,000 and to $125,000 for new construction. You all voted, and the increase was approved. On October 31st, the mayor signed a letter that was presented to him by the Portland Housing Bureau that stated that the $125,000 increase was for permanent affordability only. This is different than what you were presented and what you voted on. PCRI is building new construction for the preference policy participants. However, PCR is not using the permanent affordability model. I will properly request to be on the agenda for the next meeting in March, but I wanted to ask this question tonight. The preference policy participants PCR is currently serving will not be given the same consideration that our collaborating partners their participants are getting. And this is not equitable. And I want to know if you all were aware of this discrepancy that happened between October 12th and October 31st.
Thank you. I'll let any of the Oversight Committee respond.
I was not aware of that change at all. I felt like we were clear in our October meeting about what we were approving, so that's kind of surprising to me.
What part specifically?
The construction to 125. That was not...
In terms of it being permanently affordable?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that
Restricted.
that was... Yeah, I don't think that that restriction was... If it was explained, I don't remember it at all.
Thank you. Now, I'll ask for feedback from all of the Oversight Committee members who were present at that October meeting. Was that your recollection, Dr. Edwards? I recall. Okay, thank you.
I'd have to look back at the minutes. I don't remember exactly.
You have to take a moment. I understand, and that's fair.
I don't remember that, but I am interested in, and I think taking the right approach is to go on the agenda and bring in the report and the information.
Perfect. Thank you. Sheila?
Okay. I don't recall that we said it had to be permanent. I think I may have assumed that it would be permanent, but I don't recall.
Dr. Bates?
I was not present at that meeting, but that is not what my understanding was from the report out from the meeting later.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We look forward to having the discussion to be very clear on how dollars are dispersed. Again, as you know, our commitment, I say this on a regular basis, but our commitment is to help as many community members benefit from affordable housing as rapidly and securely as possible. So, thank you. Next, Luke Glover.
Last minute entry.
No worries. You've got 3 minutes and it starts now.
By the way, thanks for your work in creating affordable housing in North and Northeast Portland. My name is Luke Glover. I'm a resident of Kenton and a pastor of a local community, church, and a longtime resident of Kenton. And I've seen the neighborhood change drastically, and I'm also an advocate of affordable housing, because I believe diverse communities really are important. They create something that can't be replicated with single ethnicity and single income neighborhoods. I'm really advocating for that. But I want to comment on the project that was presented for Kenton, for the TriMet property. First and foremost, the project that was presented early to the Kenton Neighborhood Association, this is not the same project. What was presented to the Kenton Neighborhood Association was mixed income and with commercial at the bottom. And now we're being told that it's going to be 100% affordable housing and community space at the bottom. And I think last night was a contentious meeting. I wasn't there, but a lot of my neighbors said there was a contentious meeting because they're being told that this is a new project. The project has changed, and now it's going to be this way. That was the sentiment last night. And I'm not as big or worried about the commercial space, but the idea of it being community space brings up a lot of questions like who's going to manage that sort of thing. What's that going to look like if it's 100% affordable housing? Who's going to manage that community space at the bottom? There's a lot of questions like that. 100% affordable housing, folks who want to be in affordable housing, who have to be in affordable housing, don't want to be labeled as being in affordable housing. They want to live in communities just like the rest of us. And I think having 100% affordable housing further marginalizes people. When you walk down the street, you will say, that's the affordable housing building. People who live there don't want to be labeled like that. Mixed income housing creates diverse communities, and that's why I'm a big advocate of that. Originally, I think it was 80% affordable housing and 20% market rate, and I was in favor of that. Single income affordable housing just creates, a single community. It doesn't create a community that's integrated into the neighborhood and that sort of thing. When I saw the design tonight of the property, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. And again, it's going to further marginalize people who live in that building. I'm also really concerned, like he was, about 1 and 2 bedroom houses, units, which don't serve families. And my neighbors are really concerned about that too. So that's it. I'm just wondering if this is a done deal or is it still up in the air?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. And Luke, what we will do is make sure that you get response to that. Okay? Lynette Andrews. Welcome. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to thank you guys for this opportunity. This is all new for me, so I am one of the residents that was pushed out in East Portland. So my question is to you, committee, how is this information getting out to them? Because I don't see half of us out here. So I just want to know that. And the other question is, if they get the information and they decide that they want to stay there, okay, will you guys still support them? You know, in trying to get a house out there, because the houses are cheaper out there and they are starting to go up. I bought a home three years ago and at $249. Now it's $340. So it's eventually, the gentrification eventually is going to be coming that way soon. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are 2 things, and I was looking for Portland Housing Bureau staff to give more specifics, something that I want to address real quickly in terms of how the word is getting out. Javier, could you speak to how the word is being communicated to folks in East Portland and so forth? Javier Mena is the, well, I guess also Shannon Callahan could speak to it, but. So, Javier, you're here, and Shannon is acting director of the Portland Housing Bureau, and Javier Mena is the assistant director of the Portland Housing Bureau.
And if I may also ask Devisha to come up, Devisha has actually been doing the direct outreach in regards to the preference policy, not just manning the hotline, but actually going out at specific locations, both throughout Portland and especially in East Portland as well. So I'd welcome Devisha to tell us what she's been doing.
So efforts have been in East Portland. We're looking to expand that. That's why this round we're partnering with organizations heavy in that area. But I've regularly attended, offered on-site assistance at Midland Library. A part of our flyering is including when we'll be at certain designated application sites. We had a heavier presence at Midland Library, which I'm pretty sure everyone knows that's in East Portland, and the Troutdale Library as well. Excuse me. Heavier presence because that's where we had received the most applicants in the past. So we are working on our presence out there, outreach efforts out there. As a person who lived in North and Northeast Portland, primarily North Portland, and who now lives in East Portland, I especially am trying to make sure that outreach is out there and partnering with those organizations. So we are definitely looking to improve our efforts, but there is a presence there. We're just building it from the ground up and being very tactful in how we do that.
Javier Mena at Housing Bureau. I do have a response to the project-based session aid vouchers. If they were no longer available to projects, what we have done in the past is that if those vouchers are no longer available, we do allow them, the units to be, the restriction to up to 60% so that the project does not suffer financially.
Thank you very much.
So, was the question specifically how information gets out to the public about what we do here?
Specifically about, and then opportunities and support for those who may not want to move back, which is something that we'll have to respond to a little later because it's a little beyond our purview at this moment.
So as to the first part, I did ask the same question as well, and Ms. Goodlow responded. She said, "He understands my concerns. Despite significant efforts, it's difficult to reach everyone. We advertise in all the local papers, and it's on the website, and also send information to Multnomah County libraries and request our partners give information to their constituents. Additionally, we send out email blasts to everyone on the email list. So the best way is to get on the email list, and also there's information at the libraries. But those are the efforts currently best available that are being in use to get out information."
I can actually speak to that. I've been really sick, I'm Cupid Alexander. I'm with the mayor's office now, but I was formerly with the Portland Housing Bureau and led the charge with the preference policy. And we did it in a very extensive way, and I know that there was intentional efforts, especially on the east side, in non-traditional congregational spaces, libraries, grocery stores, barber shops in North Portland and on the east side, intentionally having ways that people can off hours go to get information in regards to the programs that we had. And so knowing that everyone doesn't have access to like a computer or a smartphone, but actually having it in multiple languages, and in fact 10 safe harbor languages, the information that was going to be provided so you can get access to some of these programs was part of our intentional charge. So that was, I think, even when doing that, we were even at places where people could come and talk to us about the programs, not talk to anyone else, but actually physically talk to us about what Portland Housing Bureau is doing, what these programs are. There was still always some sort of gap because some people just, there's no traditional way to get them information. We tried to provide information like word of mouth, like, hey, tell your grandmother, tell your grandfather, tell that person that might not be connected to any sort of system that if they have questions in regards to this program, to come talk to us. Don't read anything, just come talk to us. We had a call-in line, Divisha, personed for, it was like every day you could call at any point and we would get in contact with you within 24 hours. So almost every thinkable untraditional manner, Facebook, Twitter, everything we tried to use in order to share the information very intentionally with a focus on East Portland. And in fact, we had 2 libraries, because libraries are free, that you can access information, and we trained their staff so when we weren't there, you could ask their staff about Portland Housing Bureau programs at any point. So.
May I also suggest that if you have suggestions for us, what would be a successful way to outreach to neighbors and folks that you know would want to be involved? We'd welcome that. You know, I mean, obviously, I think we're trying to be very creative, but we may have missed opportunities. So, so we'd really appreciate any suggestions you had.
Excellent, thank you. Susan Oliver. Thanks for being here tonight. Welcome. And you've got 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you. I'm Susan Oliver, and I'm here tonight representing Kenton and the Kenton Neighborhood Association regarding the Reach Argyle project. And as Luke Glover pointed out, last night was a really vigorous meeting. Lots of people from the neighborhood showed up, and while there was contention and discussion and various viewpoints on whether or not it should remain a mixed income project, the neighborhood actually was very cohesive in its desire for the project to remain a mixed use project. We're very disappointed that the retail part of the project has gone away. Our understanding is that this is due to a $4 million shortfall in the project's funding, and a lot of legal, political stuff leads into that. But because of the shortfall, there cannot be a retail space. So the neighborhood is committed to working with Reach to raise the additional funding necessary to maintain the retail aspect of the project. So that was my the main point I wanted to get out there. The property is the gateway to the Kenton neighborhood. So we really feel like the business community needs this to remain a retail space. And maintaining a vibrant business community in Kenton is necessary to maintaining a vibrant neighborhood community. Let's see. Question. When REACH came to us over a year ago in December of 2016 to bring the project to our attention, one of the things that they wanted to do was to help Black families who had been displaced from the Kenton neighborhood to return in some way and have first rights to these units. And so I'm wondering if that is still part of the project, and if so, what is REACH doing to make that happen? Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate all the work that you do. Great job. Really excellent meeting. I've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that feedback. I can speak to the preference policy, which is the process through which people are identified, specifically those who've been displaced and impacted. And so that is part of the process. So that is absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Absolutely. The other items, I think part of that would be direct conversation with REACH, and then we can talk a little bit after that offline. Thank you. All right. Any comments from our Oversight Committee members? Any closing thoughts or comments? Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. We appreciate your time and your energy and your effort. As you can see, this is what I call a heavy lift. It's a big issue. And there are multiple facets to it. Some things that we can anticipate, some things we cannot anticipate. There are things that are within our grasp and some things that are without our grasp. However, the individuals you see here are absolutely committed to making sure that the promises that have been made become the promises that are kept. We want to make sure that people who've been impacted, displaced, marginalized, have access and opportunity to what every person should have, and that is equitable housing. So thank you for being here. Please enjoy whatever's left over to eat and have a great night.